Good afternoon and welcome to chapter 11 on the history and memory studies of the First World War. And I've been looking at commemoration in the previous chapter. I'm going to continue with that, and in particular the senses and the meanings which has taken on the poppy campaign. We're 100 years old, this campaign, and yet still being used in many different ways. And I ended the last chapter talking of the question of journalists and should they be obliged to wear poppies, which might seem quite a frightening question in a way. And there was quite a lot of debate going on about this, and one critic of this obligatory poppy attitude said this, poppies have become less a symbol of genuine grief and recognition of the soldiers who have fallen fighting in our country's armed forces. They have become more a compulsory signifier that a person is on our side. And so the idea is around, especially in conservative newspapers, that people who don't wear a poppy are not really on our side. And one group who have been frequently accused of, we're not sure they're on our side because of something I'm sure you're aware of, the rise of Islamophobia in recent years, are Muslims, and therefore a mini campaign launched by a conservative newspaper suggested that Muslims should choose to wear a hijab, foulard, a headscarf with a poppy on, so as to show that in a way the Daily Mail suggested it was not enough for Muslim women to wear a paper poppy like everybody else, but they should choose a more visible symbol. And their headline says, the poppy hijab that defies the extremists. British Muslims are urged to wear headscarf as symbol of remembrance. So the idea here is, if you're Muslim, well, we don't know if you're really patriotic, British Muslim, we don't know if you're really patriotic, so we demand that you show it in a more visible way than everywhere else. Of course, with Iraq and Afghanistan being countries which contain a large number of Muslims, there must be a certain number of British Muslims, even more than other people who consider British foreign policy to be not necessarily something to celebrate. Now, this is an interesting fact, because nobody I know ever saw any Muslim woman wearing these hijabs. It seems to be something that has been invented for the newspaper article. We saw something similar very recently. So this one was from 2014, but we saw something similar very recently in Canada, 2019, where there was a bit of a controversy because an ice hockey commentator said that, oh yes, well, everybody's wearing poppies, but you don't see the new immigrants wearing poppies, do you? So criticized them for not wearing poppies, and so this became a bit of a campaign over there. So this is the whole question of how far is the poppy a normal symbol of remembrance, and how far it is a political campaign to oblige people to show how really patriotic they really are. Now, this came up very much in the world of football. As you know, football is extremely important in the United Kingdom, and quite a number of clubs decided to have poppies put on the shirts of the footballers. So now it becomes no longer a voluntary action where I decide to wear a poppy because it corresponds to my ideas, but it becomes something so obligatory it's actually printed on, and there's nothing you can do about it. And indeed, players from 20 clubs in the Premier League wore shirts with a large remembrance poppy. And it went even further. West Ham United, a well-known football team, West Ham United, for example, commemorated the centenary with a series of special events at their game in early November. Soldiers from a local barracks marched ceremoniously onto the ground, and a minute's silence was held before the match. Now, individual footballers might not agree with wearing the poppy, but they took some risks if they did not wish to conform to this imposed consensus. For example, in the football team of Wigan, James McLean did not wear a poppy and was eventually pushed to write an open letter to his club's chairman justifying his decision. In Glasgow, things were even more heated up even more. In Glasgow, sections of the Celtics, the Celtic supporters generally seen, Celtic supporters generally seen as a Catholic milieu or even a Republican milieu, Irish Republican, were not willing to participate in the commemoration, and the local press was extremely angry. This is the Daily Record. Yesterday was a good day for Celtic on the pitch, but sadly, the conduct of a section of the support overshadowed their gutsy win over Aberdeen. On the 100th anniversary of the outbreak of the First World War, it surely shouldn't be too much to ask for grown men to stand in silence for 60 seconds in respect of those who fell. Instead, a group of Celtic fans at Pittodrie chose to interrupt this simple act of remembrance and common decency, and the anger was clear in the messages sent to our email inbox, and it goes on along those lines. So you can see how this complaint is being put forward. Not participating in the minute of silence is not treated as a political disagreement. So the newspaper does not say the people who didn't want to have a minute of silence have bad political ideas. It said they are not grown men, they are not commonly decent, so that they are refusing to be normal human beings. So you can see we had quite a politicized context, more than usual, in 2014 concerning the poppy. And in this context, a series of initiatives came up from the opposition, which questioned the values of the Red Poppy campaign. Now, the first is the White Poppy campaign. This is a campaign which has existed for several decades as a small endeavor, mostly restricted to pacifist circles. But it has gained considerably more prominence in recent years. While defending the importance of commemoration, the White Poppy campaigns nevertheless contest the glorification of the war. And the money which is made by the White Poppy campaigns is used to raise money for anti-war activities. So here you see the white poppies for a culture of peace, a very interesting slogan there. This suggests that one of the reasons for the wars in Iraq or Afghanistan or elsewhere is a culture of war. It's the feeling, the attitudes around. Now, this is a particular political position. It's not the only analysis possible of the reasons for wars. And so the white poppies, with help from the internet, have become something which is bigger than a tiny campaign. And for example, it turned out, I think in the same year, that St. John's Ambulance decided to allow their volunteers to wear a white remembrance poppy. Now, St. John's Ambulance is actually, it's not an ambulance. St. John's Ambulance is an organization which sends volunteers to big events or festivals, fairs, and so on, to help people who have small medical problems, for first aid, and it's a kind of a voluntary brigade which deals with health. It's very much an establishment organization. There's nothing radical about the St. John's Ambulance, and they've obviously had a debate about whether their volunteers should all be wearing a red poppy or whether they can choose a white one, and they decided to change the rule and allow people to wear a white poppy if they wished. So this is, like I say, a sign that the White Poppy campaign has come out of being a small thing with a few hundred people and has become something which obliges big organizations to take some sort of a stand. Now, so much for the Poppy campaign as the biggest national commemoration phenomenon. A series of national events were organized for the centenary. Now, the Poppy campaign and the Minute Silence, which I've already mentioned, since they both involve an individual decision to consent and participate caused more controversy than other national events and activities, which could be followed or ignored according to one's individual views. And one of the centerpieces of the commemoration, and a tremendously popular initiative, was the installation at the Tower of London that you can see here. It was entitled Blood-Swept Lands and Seas of Red, Blood-Swept Lands and Seas of Red. And it included one poppy made of ceramic for each death in the First World War of British or Empire troops. Almost 900,000 poppies in all, put in place over the summer months by an army, or perhaps I should say by a large group of unpaid volunteers. And the poppies were subsequently sold to raise money for military charities that help soldiers and ex-soldiers. This was a spectacular work, and it attracted millions of visitors, to such an extent that the initial plans, which were to completely dismantle the work at the end of the year, were adapted, and a part of the installation toured the entire country before being displayed permanently, I think, at the Imperial War Museum in London. Paul Cummings and Tom Piper, the creators of the installation, were awarded a medal, an MBE, by the Queen in January 2015. So what does this mean? You see all those poppies, and you can see that they're not actually moving. They're set up so as to look as if they're a waterfall of poppies. And there you can see what it looks at like. They're on wires. It's not magic. Interesting idea. The Tower of London, then, a tremendously symbolic central place built by William the Conqueror and his mates in 1066, part of it, and something very spectacular. Now, why spectacular? Well, spectacular obviously is useful in the sense that it attracts many millions of visitors and tourists. It became a tourist attraction. And also because people might think that the Great War, certainly the worst war that Britain the war which brought the most suffering to Britons compared with any other war, and 100 years. So that's rather a spectacular event, the commemoration, the marking of the centenary. And so the spectacular side of it was important. And it was a very, very popular installation indeed. It was criticized by anti-militarists who said, well, look at this. It's very beautiful. But should it be beautiful? Isn't this aestheticizing suffering? Is it just making war pretty and so on? And one of the reactions on the internet to this was to circulate this text. In a moving tribute to British soldiers who died in World War I, all 88,246 handmade poppies at the Tower of London exhibition have been mowed down by machine gun fire. Tourists looked on horrified as a row of specially restored Maschinengewehr 8 machine guns were rolled into place along the embankment and started to obliterate the fragile ceramic flowers. This was always the plan, explained artist Tom Piper, who helped to devise the expedition. Otherwise, it would just have been some sort of mawkish display of nationalism. Now, I don't know how quick you are of picking up at this. This is a parody article. It's not true. But it's a protest against the aestheticization of the commemoration and saying, you know, if they really wanted to commemorate, they should have machine gunned all the poppies, and then people could imagine the terrible, terrible violence which the soldiers suffered in the trenches. Okay, that was the most spectacular of the national events, but there were many more. There was a national Lights Out initiative on the 4th of August, when every house in Britain was asked to switch off the lights between 10 and 11 p.m. I don't know if they really did, but this Lights Out event was meant to echo the words said to have been pronounced by the British Foreign Secretary Edward Grey in 1914. The lamps are going out all over Europe. We shall not see them lit again in our lifetime. So you can see there was a taste for the theatrical and a taste for the spectacular. And no doubt this is something which separates commemoration from history to some extent. History is not supposed to be looking for the theatrical. Now, some of the commemorative events had less of a clear link to the history of a century ago. For example, plans were made to plant many thousands of trees to help with the environment at the same time as commemorating the First World War. The Woodland Trust, responsible for this project, set up a series of First World War centenary woods where they grew thousands of trees to commemorate the First World War. And this is what they said on their website. At a time when our woodland cover is so low compared to other countries, planting trees is now more important than ever. As well as representing the enormous strength and bravery showed by the nation during the First World War, the trees that are planted during the course of this project will help strengthen our natural landscape, increasing its resilience to threats posed by pests and diseases. Now, I wouldn't like to be excessively cynical, but they are saying here we are planting trees. The trees represent the enormous strength and bravery of the nation. Are trees particularly brave? One might be allowed to doubt. And in any case, notice that what do the Woodland Trust do every year? In 2010, 2011, 2012, they plant trees. And so in 2014, they're planting trees in commemoration of the First World War. You did get the impression that there might be a certain desire to get some of the public money which was available for the centenary. Quite naturally, the world of broadcasting was keen to be at the center of the commemoration, and each television and radio channel produced a range of programs. On the BBC website, one could read, "The BBC's World War I centenary season is unlike any other season the BBC has undertaken, not least because of its scale. With programming and events spanning the 4 years from 2014 to 2018, it is the biggest and most ambitious BBC project ever commissioned, with more than 2,500 hours of programs already planned across television, radio, and online." And you see, I'm not going to go through them all, but just to take the BBC, you had dramas looking at at stories about soldiers and stories about nurses. You had documentaries of the battlefield, documentaries of the alleged home fronts. 6 dramas a year for 4 years about the dramas about the royal family during the war, because of course the Kaiser who led the nation of Germany was related to the Queen of England. Historical debates. There you have historians Niall Ferguson and Max Hastings, who talk about whether the war was necessary or not. There you have Margaret Macmillan. We already spoke about her. Arts and music, art and music, which talks about the war. Ballads about the war. Stories about composers during the war. And concerts to commemorate the war. And then, as you can see at the end there, sometimes quite official ceremonies. Westminster Abbey, in the evening, hundreds of candles will be lit. One by one, they will be extinguished until at 11 p.m. when the war was officially declared. The final one is put out. So again, a search for the spectacular, but also for the explanatory, documentaries and dramas and so on. It really is a massive festival of commemoration, which does also involve history and not just commemoration. Here's an example of an artistic activity, because there was quite a lot of public money available, government money available for artists who wanted to commemorate by producing artistic activities, from a wood in Monmouthshire to the salt marshes of Orford, from Liverpool docks to the cathedrals of Belfast, from the site of the trials of conscientious objectors in London to Worcester Cathedral. Artists across the UK will create new works in response to the events of the First World War, ranging widely from large-scale free outdoor events to intimate immersive theatre works. The programme to commemorate by artists will include dance, installations, cartoons, a major new choral commission, poetry, films, photography, and so on. And they involve quite a number of quite well known artists, some less known artists as well. And you see one here in Birmingham, for example, an army of 5,000 ice sculptures of soldiers slowly melting in the sun was set up in commemoration of the war. Why not? Although perhaps if you look a little bit more carefully at the curriculum vitae of this artist, you might find something interesting. That is that he always does ice sculptures which melt away, but this year they're in commemoration of the First World War. There was a tour of a musical show in Cheshire railway station based on the songs of a century ago, and at least a dozen other new plays about the war were produced in 2014. So there you go, some of the national events. I still have some more national events, and the next few go into this question of who are we commemorating? Now, of course, the monuments which were put up in the 1920s concentrated very much on commemorating the dead. They very often have the list of all the names. For example, in Paris, outside the Père Lachaise cemetery, there's an enormous list of all the names of Parisians who died during the First World War as soldiers. Now, later on, however, in the 21st century, there is an attempt to commemorate people who were not commemorated recently, and I will go for I will talk about a number of examples that. The first and perhaps the most novel group to be remembered are those who were executed for cowardice or desertion by the British Army. So this is a monument to commemorate those soldiers who ran away or who fell asleep on duty and were executed by their own army, by the British Army. The idea being that at the time, people assumed, oh, well, they were cowards, they deserved to be shot. Whereas today, people might want to say that they had shell shock or post-traumatic syndrome or something, that they had mental health problems, and therefore that the executions were unfair. Now, family members of executed soldiers had long lobbied for a pardon since the 40s, 50s, 60s, and so on. And year after year, decade after decade, the governments had replied that this was not legally possible or politically desirable. However, in 2006, a blanket pardon of all those executed was announced. Now, the general pardon may have been partly due to a fear that detailed examination of individual cases in law courts would have been politically embarrassing. In any case, before the pardon, a few years before, this national monument to the executed, the Blindfold and Alone monument, representing a young soldier blindfolded and awaiting the firing squad, was erected. And this statue was placed at the National Memorial Arboretum. That is to say, at a national official location linked to the military. So you have this rather contradictory or paradoxical situation, paradoxical indeed, where in an official place organized very much in collaboration with the army, you have a monument to those people who were executed by the same army. This seems to have caused little comments. In fact, there is the full monument. Other commemorative activities also wanted to include people which had not been previously commemorated, who had not been previously commemorated. The exhibition at the Imperial War Museum North in Manchester concentrated on recreating the streets of 1914 to 18, the streets of the town of Manchester, not the trenches, which have always been the emblematic Great War places to remember and recount. The new London Imperial War Museum also presents a whole section on life at home, as well as fighting fronts. The Labour spokesman who I mentioned, Dan Jarvis, insisted on this perceived need to widen the commemoration. He said, "I strongly believe that if we want to properly commemorate the First World War, if we want to do justice to the memory of those who lived through it, then these commemorations cannot be solely about those who fought and died on the front line. We also have to remember the heroes on the home front, the miners, factory and railway workers, the nurses and the farmers." So this is an interesting new idea that everybody is a hero, everybody deserves commemorating. And it might be thought that commemorating everybody is like commemorating nobody, that it weakens the original meaning, but certainly it's something that is something that's well worth thinking about. A number of people insisted over the last 20 years, in fact, a number of people have insisted that colonial peoples, the Indians, a very large number of Indians and Africans and West Indians who fought for the British Empire during the First World War, also should be commemorated. And this in November 2002, so nearly 20 years ago, the memorial gates were opened in London Hyde Park, and they were built to remember the peoples of India, Africa, and the Caribbean who fought in both world wars. The memorial was opened by Queen Elizabeth, and the main inscription reads, "In memory of the 5 million volunteers from the Indian subcontinent, Africa, and the Caribbean who fought with Britain in the 2 world wars." So here we have the developments in the treatment of racism, anti-racism, and inclusion reflected in the public places of commemoration. Another example, there was a campaign this year, not this year, sorry, there was a campaign a few years ago to award a bravery medal posthumously after his death to the first ever black officer of the British Army. This was a footballer from Tottenham at the beginning of the century, and he joined the army and became an officer. He was the first ever black officer in the British Army. And people looking at the story of his life concluded that the officers who were whites who had done similar work were all given a medal, and he didn't get one, and they think he would have got one if he had been white. So this was a small campaign, but I think it opens up interesting questions. Okay, so that was a whole series of national events, of commemoration. I now want to go on to the 3 tendencies within commemoration that Nicolas Offenstadt spoke about. Number 1 is family history, the family history current in commemorative activity. Now, this is linked to the vastly increasing interest in genealogy and family history evident over the last 20 years. Although family history is not as established as in the United States, perhaps understandably in a country where the vast majority of the population are descended from people who came from elsewhere in the last couple of hundred years, 300-400 years. So the family history is not as important in Britain as in the United States. But it is getting bigger and bigger. The rise of the internet is also part of the cause, because finding information about people across the world who were related to you, or getting in contact with people across the world who are related to you is much, much easier since the internet. British bookshops are full of advice books about how to establish a family history, and popular television shows such as Who Do You Think You Are trace celebrity family history, as well as giving tips to the general public. So here we have 3 examples of books to help you write your family history about the First World War. You see, they're quite specific. Now, for the centenary, many local newspapers have encouraged people to send in the story of their ancestors. And so, for example, the Lancashire Evening Telegraph wrote, "We want your family memories of the First World War. The Lancashire Telegraph plans to tell the story of East Lancashire's Great War heroes and the life of the people left behind. If you have any stories about your grandfather or other family member in the war, or of their heroism, experiences, or how they coped when they returned home, we would like to hear from you. Whereas the Yorkshire Film Archive worked hard at restoring films from 100 years ago and wanted to try to identify the individuals in these films which were made in Yorkshire 100 years ago. This moves us on then from family pride to local pride. Narratives of pride or attachment to localities constitute a second powerful strand running through commemoration activities. Now, local pride is an interesting thing. Of course, we still see it today. People from Marseille are sometimes proud to be from Marseille. People from Toulouse sing a song about it. Mon pays at Toulouse. And this is the same in Britain. You can be Manchester, you can be Lancashire, certainly you can be from the north. Now, local pride was no doubt even more important 100 years ago when people moved far less from one region to another. And indeed, recruitment authorities recognized this when they created the PALS battalions. And the PALS battalions were quite simple in many towns. They said, if you join the army, we promise we will keep you all together, people from the same town. Now, this helped recruitment, but was an absolute disaster from the point of view of public relations, because if 5% of your soldiers are killed in the army, it is not the case that 5% in every regiment are killed. What happens is you have regiments with 1%, regiments with 3%, and then regiments with 40%, because they were in the most dangerous place. Now, if you have put in the same regiment people from the same town, you can get terrible, terrible results. And my town, Accrington in Lancashire, which had about 20,000 people, lost 700 men on one day on the 1st of July, 1916. So the local pride is also about local commemoration. And indeed, for the centenary, this is the town centre of my hometown, and this huge banner commemorating the Accrington Pals was raised in the town centre, while the local theatre group, the Oswald Twistle Players, staged a theatre play about the Accrington Battalion. This kind of commemoration happened elsewhere. In Liverpool, there was a play at the main public hall, the St George's Hall. A BBC campaign offered to make available information about particular localities around the country. And also, so let me see what they said. Find World War I stories from your streets. Do you know what happened in your town during World War I? In June, we're adding more than 200 local stories to the At Home collection, bringing voices from around the UK and Ireland together to tell the story of the home front during World War I. You will be able to find local reports by searching by postcode. So this is both local pride, like the Accrington Pals were saying, let's write a play about them, let's show how proud we are of them. Although also such a play, I didn't see the play, but it would not be surprising if it was also very critical of the military hierarchy. The commemoration can cover different political points of view. But also local interest, that there is a tendency within commemoration for people to want to know what happened in their town 100 years ago, which is interesting. We already saw this in the writing of history, and this attempts by locals and sometimes groups of locals to write the history of Brighton in the First World War, Hove in the First World War, and so on and so forth. A tiny variant on local pride is trade pride. And so you can see here, during World War I, thousands of railway workers served king and country. So there you have this, publicity campaign that people should not forget railway workers. And this, of course, is in a railway station. So you get this very local or very sectional pride. I've looked at family history and genealogy, and I've looked at local pride as a trend. after looking at the national events and some of the political debates. In the next chapter, this is the end of this chapter, in the next chapter I will be looking at activist discourses, so directly political discourses, and what happens to them in the marking of the centenary of the First World War in Britain. Thank you for listening.